Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we have another War Thunder devlog, and it's for the F4U-7, which is going to be a French Corsair. Now I know what a lot of you are thinking, well, it's just a Corsair. You know, we already have a bunch of them in the American tree. What's going to be different about this one? Well, to be quite honest, quite a lot. The first thing to realize about the F4U-7 was that it was much more designed in the ground attacker role, especially, you know, after World War II, because, well, jets came to the forefront. So as jets came to the forefront, they were covered by the fighter area, so therefore stuff like the Bearcats, stuff like the F4Us, even the Tiger Cats were much more designed around the attacker role. That's why you have stuff like the F8 F1B, the F4U-7, and even the Tiger Cat in its current state. All of these vehicles, by the time the Korean War came about, were designated much more in the ground attacker role than they were in the fighter role, and this one is no different, even if it was under a different name. So the F4U-7 starts off as a Corsair, but one thing you have to understand is, first of all, the engine that it used was worse than the one which was present on the F4U-5. And also this machine was heavier because of the amount of armor that was on it, as I said, because it was designed for that ground attacker role. Mostly what you're getting out of this machine, I think the best way to describe it is a heavy Corsair, and it's going to be mainly only used in ground realistic, or it's going to be used in air realistic to pretty much finish a game within 5 minutes if it's left alone, and we'll go through why that is. So after the end of the Second World War, aircraft manufacturer Vought, or however you want to say it, continued perfecting its carrier-based Corsair fighter bombers. Corsair fighters had already proved to be excellent attack planes during the war, and Vought engineers wanted to improve the plane's ability to destroy ground targets at low altitudes. So as I said, even though it says like the engineers wanted to improve it, of course they would want to, they'd also want to improve its air-to-air combat abilities. But by the time of the Korean War, these types of planes were dedicated to the ground attack role. One of the interesting things I read a couple of days ago was about how the Americans didn't really want to use their new jet technology in the Korean War, at least where they didn't need to, such as in a ground attack role. So therefore, it was given to these fighters. The reason why they didn't want to use the jets was if they lost, some of the jets in those roles, they didn't want to give up technology that the newest technology they had. So therefore, using these planes and stuff like Bearcats made a lot more sense, because if they get shot down, then the enemy already knows what's inside of them, where when it came to the jets, it wasn't exactly known if the enemies of the US knew what was inside of them. During the Korean War, we've already read that. During the Korean War, the AU-1 attack aircraft, or the F4U-6s, were put into service in the United States Marine Corps with improved pylons that allowed them to carry additional armament. Soon after the release of the AU-1, Vought received an order of these carrier-based fighters from France. The AU-1 attackers were supplied for the order, as well as AU-1s refitted with the engine from the F4U-4. Because the F4U-4 cowl was a slightly different shape and size, its air intake was repositioned. So as you can see, this is based pretty much solely on a American fighter, the AU-1, which isn't really a surprise. There are slight differences, but it's very much how in the French tree we have the AD-4, and then in the American tree, a few updates later, we got the AD-4. I feel like that's what's going to happen here as well. In the French tree, we're going to start off with the F4U-7, give them a nice little shiny thing, even though it's, pseudo-American. And then when a few updates roll around and everybody's, ground out their new French aircraft, they're going to stick it in the American tree in the form of the AU-1, which will be slightly different, but I mean, it will be negligible. It's kind of like with the AD-4, where it has slightly different secondary armaments depending on which nation, but overall, they're very similar planes. One of the things I talked about quite a lot, and I still believe in it, is the idea that I don't want to play separate nations and have to grind out the same vehicles. So for France, we already have stuff like the 75 Jumbo, the M4A1, which are straight copies of the American versions of those machines. We also have the F8 F1B, we have a King Cobra there, and all of these planes, I really don't like the fact that they're in the French tree. I understand that the French use them, and I get that, but the issue is from a gameplay point of view, I am stuck researching the same vehicle with the same modifications, maybe slightly different modifications when it comes to its secondary armaments, but nothing massive. And if I've already flown a plane, I don't want to fly it again if I fully spaded it, and that's just my mindset on the matter. So if we do get the F4U-7, and then when the AU-1 comes around, because I'm sure it will one day, we're going to have to once again have a chat about this idea, just like we had with the AD4. Now, some people will say that the AD4 for the Americans is sufficiently different because of its secondary armament and that being its main purpose, and that's completely fine if you believe that. For me, it isn't, because I am pretty much just playing exactly the same plane, exactly the same characteristics, in exactly the same way in a different tree. So yeah, the only argument I suppose also you could talk about with ground attackers is that it melds differently with the tanks that you have on your team. So obviously the AD4 for the Americans is going to have different vehicles with it than the French one. And also with the F4U-7, it's going to have different vehicles to the AU-1 one when that comes around. So these fighters were given the designation, the F4U-7, and in 1953 the US began delivering them to France. The F4U-7 Corsairs were the last series modification for this incredible carrier-based aircraft and took part in armed conflicts in French Indochina, Algeria, and the Suez Crisis. In addition to standard American suspended armament, the French also armed the F4U-7 with their own SNEB unguided rockets in containers with plastic nacelles, T-10 rockets, and 10 French high-explosive 100-kilo bombs. So as you can see, this is the main draw of the machine. A lot of the other Corsairs we have in-game are high-altitude or mid-altitude fast aircraft which are designed to run and gun an enemy, or at least that's how I see it. When you engage in a long fight with a Corsair, generally you will lose because of its heaviness, so it loses a lot of energy over time, so you basically have to boom and zoom, run and gun, whatever you want to call it. And with this machine, because it's heavier, because it's designed to have more secondary armaments, because it has 420mm on it, and because it has a slightly less powerful engine, or at least a comparable engine to the F4U-4B, but as I said, a heavier machine, you're not going to get that. You're not going to get a fighter. You're going to have to use this in the ground attack role, and if you want to use it in an air-on-air role, it's going to be a hell of a lot harder for you to do so, and you might as well just take an F4U-4B at the end of the day. But yeah, one of the main things, as I said, is the secondary armament, and if you want to have a look at these pictures, you may see why a lot of people are talking about it. So, as you can see, these are 6 pods of SNEB rockets. Now that is, should be just around about 100 of these things. I might be wrong on that, it may be slightly less. I believe it's, if it's anything, it's slightly less. But at the end of the day, we already have these in game on some of the jets for France, and they do a decent amount of damage. It's going to be interesting to see just the sheer amount of them used and how they're going to how they're going to work in ground forces, because in air forces, I still feel like missile rockets in general are just not that useful. T-10 rockets are very useful, in my opinion, in ground forces, so that's nice to see. And then the 10 100-kilo bombs, I mean, that's nice, but I think you take the rockets instead if you are using if you're using this in ground realistic. and air realistic, it's going to be how much explosive damage you can do to bases. So the bombs might be there to be able to use it. I've seen a few people comparing this thing to the P-47. The difference is, with the P-47, if I don't take any armament on it, then what I get is a pretty decent fighter, a pretty decent high-energy fighter which can dive to mid to low at high speeds, be able to still have decent control and a lot of guns on it. With the F4U-7, what I get is a fighter which is a lot heavier by, how it is. Its engine is definitely not as powerful, and it has 420s of the I believe they're A&M 3s, they might be A&M 2s, but since it's a 1953 aircraft, it would make sense for them to be A&M 3s. But with them, if you've ever played the F8 F1B or the Corsair with the M3s, or maybe not the Tiger Cat, but the Tiger Cat also has them, is the fact that when they're wing mounted, they're a little bit spray and pray. They're much more shotgun cannons in that sense, very similar to the Hispano cannons, the Mark Vs, until you get the upgrades for them. The M3s are exactly the same, so you're not going to be able to rely on them. This thing isn't going to climb well. I'm sure it'll have access to war emergency power, but still, you're not going to climb well compared to stuff that you're going to fight. There's a little factoid here, and I don't know why they threw this in. I highly doubt it's going to be in the game, but it's still something interesting to think about. So the F4U-7 was also tested with the SS-11 anti-tank guided missiles on its cantilevered pylons. Unfortunately, this experiment was not particularly successful. Controlling a missile while flying the aircraft proved challenging at best, so the Corsairs with ATGMs were never used in combat. Now, we have a lot of machines which were never used in combat, so we have a lot of secondary armaments which were never used in combat, or at least were tested outside of combat, seemed to not work, so they didn't bother. The Vickers P comes to mind, the Polkastora is another one, and there are many machines that we have out there with different armaments which were never fully used in battle, or at least maybe used once or twice, which we see in game. Now, will the SS-11 anti-tank guided rockets be one of them for the F4U-7? I mean, I tell you what, if they added it, then there'll be a lot of people grinding the F4U-7 for this, because as I said in previous videos, this would be the next step in the way that Air Forces is going to go. When you look at Rank 6, a lot of people talk about the missiles, the missile systems, and all of this. And the ATGMs from stuff like helicopters or from stuff like aircraft is the intermediary step from looking at those, rank 6 jets and stuff. So if they wanted to test this system in an environment which isn't really going to, have too many issues, or test it in an environment which is going to be on the live server, and also I can't think of the word that I'm thinking of, but basically just test it with the player base without having an overpowered scenario, this is the way to do it. Because if they throw in the SS-11s on this thing, even if the rockets themselves or the missiles themselves, depending on how you see them, if the missiles themselves do a lot of damage and they're easy to aim, then what they can do is when Rank 6 comes out, or when they decide to add these to other planes, they can tweak it a little bit so it's not as overpowered. So we're not going from this step to 5 huge steps over here. Instead, we're doing little incremental ones with additions to planes which either already exist, or little incremental ones for planes which don't, such as this one. I think it's an interesting idea to try it and test it, but we'll have to see how they do it in the future, because you've got to remember the SS-11 rockets are mouse keyboard they are keyboard controlled in game. The SDRV has them, and also the AMX-13 SS-11. So I don't know how they would do that from a plane. I think they would just make it mouse guided, but who knows. In War Thunder, the F4U-7 will be part of the French aircraft tree. Makes sense. Its technical characteristics are virtually identical to the F4U-4B Corsair and include excellent speed and rate of climb, agile maneuverability, and four-fronted 20mm cannons with a generous amount of ammunition. The key difference between the F4U-7 and the F4U-4B is that the F4U-7 features a wide selection of suspended armament, the standard armament 10 HVAR rockets, and either 10 250s, 4 500s, and 3,000 or 3,000 pounds of bombs, is supplemented with French-made ordnance also found in jet-powered aircraft, up to 114 Snap unguided rockets. Well, there you go then. Over 100 rockets. This is going to be fun. T-10 unguided rockets on cantilever pylons, 5 on each wing, so that's only 10. I mean, that's okay. And 10 100 kilo bombs. So basically what it's saying here is when we get the AU-1 in the American tree, that's the loadout it's going to have. 10 HVARs and either 10 250s, 4 500s, or 3 1000s. Where this one is going to get the added advantage of the 114 SNEB rockets, the T-10s, and also the 100 kilo bombs. What is interesting about this statement here is they compare it very much to the F4U-4B. I would actually say its flight characteristics are worse than an F4U-4B. Just as I said before, it was heavier, the engine was around about the same since they took it from the F4U-4B. The AU-1 definitely was a little bit, at least weaker than the F4U-5, which, I mean, we don't have the F4U-5 in game, maybe one day we will. But I think comparing it to the F4U-4B is not a great idea, just because it's going to have worse performance than the F4U-4B, and a lot of people are going to come out thinking that it's going to have similar performance and it's going to be able to carry crazy ordnance. And maybe they do a copy-paste flight model. If they want to do that, then go ahead. But to be honest, they shouldn't. This thing should be its own flight model. It should be not slow, but it definitely shouldn't be as quick as an F4U-4B. It shouldn't have the same rate of climb, and agile maneuverability, I mean, it shouldn't do that either. So I'm kind of confused by that. I mean, I'm guessing it'll have a loadout where you won't be able to take any secondary armaments, and then we can, work out if it is basically just a copy-paste flight model, but I really hope it isn't. Because it is its own plane and should be treated as such because of the extra armor and all of that jazz which is on it. The French F4U-7 Corsair is an excellent fighter plane and incredibly dangerous for ground targets. It will be terrorizing enemies in the air and on the ground when it arrives. So yeah, it looks like you can see all the beautiful rockets here. Don't they look really nice? Let's just zoom out. Ta-da! It seems like they're setting this thing up to be like a P-47 then. So the F4U-4B in-game does perform pretty well. The cannons on it are nice once you get all of the upgrades. One of the only real issues with it is it takes a while to get up to altitude. Now, if they take the F4U-7, give it an attacker's spawn, and make it so it doesn't have to take a load, and then give the flight model of the F4U-4B, then what you're going to get there is just a better version of the F4U-4B, and it's going to be able to stomp everything just like the P-47 does, as long as it gets up to altitude. The main thing about these aircraft, the Corsairs, the P-47s, a lot of the Americans, is they have to get up to altitude before they're useful. And if this thing is allowed to be, then it may become a dominant force on the battlefield. I still think its main purpose is going to be annihilating ground forces. I mean, you can't give something 114 SNEB rockets and then just, not annihilate ground forces. Same with the T-10s, which are very effective. Overall, I am actually looking forward to this plane. I don't agree with people saying that it's a copy-paste. It isn't a copy-paste. It is a different aircraft in its entirety, but hopefully they do give it a different flight model than the F4U-4B. I'm sure they will, but we're going to have to test it once it gets to the dev server. And also, it's going to be interesting to see if it has an armament which does not have any secondaries on it. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.